Let's give a big, warm Clark College welcome to Cheryl Bledsoe.
Weird to get claps before I speak. That's very strange. All right. Well, it is absolutely my pleasure to be here. I'm actually glad we had some kind of initial chit-chat to sort of talk about social media. I'll give you a couple of disclaimers right off the bat. I talk fast, so at any given point during this presentation, I talk too fast. Feel free to give me the international slow down sign or, go back over that because I didn't quite get it. We are going to tell a lot of stories today. I am actually not a young social media user anymore. I definitely have crossed the line into old people social media, according to my 13-year-old daughter. And so we're going to talk a lot about reasons why you should use social media, like what you can do on it, kind of going in and out of the variety of different things that are possible. And then we're going to talk about what I think you should do on social media. So I might actually answer your questions and some of yours back there. We're not going to get really specific into platforms, but we are going to have some Q&A at the end. So I'm happy to get into that as we kind of roll through this presentation. So with that being said, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story. So I'm not a natural social media user. In fact, I'm not even a natural technician by any stretch of the imagination. I've had three distinct careers. I spent my 20s working in juvenile justice, started at a youth correctional facility working for kids that were incarcerated from age 14 to age 21, working at the Nacelle Youth Camp, which is right on the other side of the Astoria-Megler Bridge. So if you know kind of where the Astoria Bridge is at, I have served at the Nacelle Youth Camp. Worked with assault and robbery kids that were incarcerated for violent offenses, and ultimately moved here to work in Clackamas County as a juvenile probation officer. So spent about 8 years working in juvenile probation, working with diversion, first-time cases, and making decisions on kids that were initially arrested at the point of their arrest. So Oregon state law gives you 5 hours to determine what should happen to kids upon the point of arrest. And that there's a variety of options, right? Some kids may need to be hospitalized based on their mental issues or things that they might be dealing with. Some kids get incarcerated based on the type of crime that they get arrested for. Some kids just get returned to their parents or a guardian. And some kids end up just getting released to themselves based on time of day and what they got arrested for, curfew-wise. And so it was my job to work graveyard shift Thursday night to Sunday night, my favorite nights of the week because that's when a lot of kids get arrested, and make those fun calls at 2 a.m. to parents to say, do you know Johnny? Because Johnny's sitting here in one of my cells waiting for you to come pick him up. So that was super fun. Loved that job. But transitioned after 9/11 happened, September 11, 2001, got really interested in emergency response and dealing with first responders. Became a volunteer for the American Red Cross, responding to fire. Folks that had initially been burned out of their homes as a disaster action team volunteer. And I also became a trauma intervention volunteer, which responds to people who have lost someone who has immediately died, like within 15 minutes of the death being reported. A trauma intervention volunteer goes on the scene to be the support of the family members until their family can make it to the scene. So sometimes you were involved in calls for 15, 20 minutes. Sometimes you're involved in calls for 15 to 20 hours based on the type of situation. My specialty as a trauma intervention volunteer was to work with child death situations. So I was immediately on the response where kids had been run over by cars, where kids have been rolled over in the bed of their parents and passed away. And so my response specialty was working with young kids still, even after being a probation officer. That led to an interest in becoming an emergency manager. And I interviewed for a job. I had studied Homeland Security as a master's thesis in my master's program at Washington State University. And I interviewed for a job to be a commissioner assistant. And was actually told, you know what, you're too overqualified for this job. You're actually applying for kind of this entry-level government job, but if you'll hang around for 6 to 8 months in your juvenile probation officer position, we might have a job for creating the first Homeland Security analyst position in Clackamas County. And so I went from there to become the first Homeland Security analyst person in 2004. Worked there for a couple of years and got into the really interesting predicament of no one knowing what a Homeland Security analyst does, because after 9/11, everyone and their dog was a Homeland Security analyst, and there was no good job description or job definition for what that person kind of did other than managing federal grants. So I got to look at other job announcements, found that the emergency manager position was open here at the Clark Regional Emergency Services Agency, and I applied for it and became the emergency management division manager over at CRESA. And CRESA is a 911 facility. They also handle emergency management. And the next 10 years of my life, I spent dealing with a number of different floods, windstorms, terrorism events that were kind of not known necessarily to the media, and also working in an emergency preparedness program kind of focused on emergency response here in Clark County, which was fabulous because I live here in Clark County and I love living here. Even when I worked in Clackamas County, it was awesome to be able to go to a job that was only 15 minutes from my home. But as good emergency managers, and as you may know, disasters always happen on Thursday evenings or Friday mornings. We had a windstorm up here in Clark County that happened on a Thursday evening. And one of the problems in that windstorm was the fact that I wasn't able to change the Clark County website at all. So within about 90 minutes of time, we had about $2.3 million of damage that happened here in Clark County, thanks to a couple of landslides and windstorm situations, and a website that stayed essentially static all weekend long. Well, that also happened to be the weekend the Columbian decided to say, how come the public's not getting information about this emergency and this disaster? Are we sitting on our hands? I go to the CRESA website, it says business as normal, here's our operating hours, and I didn't have access to IT professionals to update my website because it was a weekend and they'd all gone home for the weekend. So out of that windstorm, back in 2005, 2004, 2005, or no, wait, we're in 2007, 8, I believe now. I had an after action item that I needed to figure out how to communicate to the public directly without having to rely on IT professionals. And I'll tell you, my husband laughs to this day that the word technology is in my daily job description because I'm not a technician. I was trained as a sociologist, and my career was initially learning how people communicate and how they functionally share information in a culture, right? So we began kind of embarking on the path of how do we incorporate social media into emergency response. And what I didn't realize at the time was I was one of 5 emergency managers across the United States that were focused on using social media in emergency management. And we are considered the first 5 sort of pioneers of bringing social media into emergency response. Because prior to that engagement, what we found is that emergency management programs and government programs were great about creating flyers, creating brochures, and pumping information out to the public, but we really didn't care what the public did with that information. If you were confused by that information, or you didn't believe that information, or you had something to say about that information, our door was proverbially closed. We really didn't care about what you thought about it or if you were confused by it. And what social media did for us was open that door and give us the opportunity to listen. Like, does the public buy it? Do they have questions about it? Is there additional things that we need to do? And so that is kind of how I got the title SMEM Mama. I was one of the first 5 emergency managers to work with social media and emergency management, which is what SMEM stands for. So if you are on Twitter and see the word SMEM, that's what it stands for on Twitter, and you'll often see me conversating in some of those conversations. And I'm the mama because there's one other guy who's considered the papa of social media and emergency management, and the 2 of us were considered kind of the forefathers of getting this into the public sector. That being said, I also now manage a nonprofit in all my free time, which is not as much free time as I would like. But I also manage a nonprofit response agency that teaches volunteers to how they get involved in emergency response, which are we support virtual operations support teams. They're called VOS teams. And so you'll also see that hashtag across my timelines. We train volunteers to work in social media and disaster crisis zones to identify what the needs of the community is talking about during any emergency response. So that's kind of my professional story. I also have a day job. I'm a 911 technology manager, and I work now for Clackamas County 911 as their technology manager, bringing in technologies into the 911 sector that incorporate voice and data. So it kind of blended that social media experience into the 911 world, and that's where professionally I sit today.
Were you part of the initiative when they, in Clackamas and area, started getting phone text to 911?
Yes, in fact, that was my project.
Because we have a part of the CRESA Facebook group, but that was like a big thing about that. I'm trying to bring it over here.
Yep, in fact, that Text to 911 project, which happened last year,
yes.
There was a number of us that worked on that project very heavily, and we actually incorporated Text to 911 from Mount Hood out to the Oregon coast, just in time for the Hood to Coast race, which was awesome because we got all the jurisdictions from Clackamas County, which goes all the way to Mount Hood, out to Astoria. So if you go along the 26 corridor, text to 901 is now functional in that area. But currently we're trying to make it statewide, border to border. We've got about 2/3 of the state on board with it so far, and we're hoping by the end of this year, beginning of next year, we'll have actually state-to-state, stateside coverage in Oregon, in the state of Oregon. Washington's a little bit kind of behind that a bit. So personally, I'm also a wife and mother. I have 2 kids. I have a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old, and I'll credit the 13-year-old for keeping me in touch with social media platforms I didn't even know existed. So anyone here playing on Marco Polo? Done, yes. So she just turned 13, and I gave her the opportunity to have her first social media account. And so I thought, well, what's your first social media account going to be? I said, Facebook or Twitter? And she scoffed. She's like, no, that is the old people's social media, Mom. So she's on Snapchat and Marco Polo. So, go figure. She's in 8th grade, loves, but they communicate very much through visual. Marco Polo is very much like a Snapchat, except it doesn't, it stays forever, but allows them to do video chat kind of back and forth to each other. So it's very interesting kind of seeing the stuff that she gets into that I haven't even yet really played around with. But I'll tell you, I joined social media a bit reluctantly. My husband was already on MySpace when I joined social media, and I swore I was never going to get on social media because MySpace annoyed the crap out of me. If you remember MySpace, who in here had MySpace accounts? Did y'all have the blinkies and oh my word. I am swearing I'm never joining a webpage that starts with music. And I am never joining a webpage that has any level of MySpace blinkies. And I'll actually describe that to people like, your website looks like a MySpace page. And now they say, what's that? So I lurked my husband's account. I never actually had a MySpace account of my own. Facebook was my first account, I believe. I just celebrated my 10-year anniversary on Facebook. So I've been on there. I also joined Twitter probably within the year. About 10 years ago, and didn't tweet at all for the first 8 months. In fact, if you go back into my timeline, it looks like I started 8 months after my account started because I didn't do a single tweet. All I did was watch how people communicated and tried to look at how to use 140 characters, right? Mm-hmm. And there's probably still people in this room today that say that you can say nothing in 140, right? Hopefully I can prove that wrong by the end of our conversation today. So we're first going to focus, I'm only going to have 2 basic presentation points. One's going to be kind of what can you do on social media, and one is going to be what should you do on social media. So we'll cover things that I do or don't do, and there are things that I used to do that I don't do now. And there's certainly the platforms have evolved considerably over the past 10 years. Communication has evolved considerably, and we'll talk about some of the good stuff and the bad stuff. I'd say we're in a very interesting time for the social media, and it's gone far more negative than where it was when I joined back in 2008. So it is a challenge. But we're going to kind of wander through a number of different stories. Happy to entertain questions, and we'll do some conversation at the end as well. And I'm also going to tell you I'm a government employee, right? So what that means as a government employee is the technology I get to play in on a regular basis is not always the most up-to-date technology. So I'm going to tell you that if you have any other social media speakers, they're probably miles ahead of where I am with regards to our implementation. But it's a very interesting world when you work in government because there's layers of message approval and layers of things you can and can't do based on the mission of your agency. So it can be I can be a very different social media speaker than someone who's in the private sector and using it for all sorts of SEO or all sorts of return on investment for the time involved. So take what I say with a grain of salt and understand this is my perspective and my experience. And I share it with you simply to give you a different perspective on how you're looking at social media today. So the first thing I would say that you can do on social media is not to say anything at all. In fact, what I would tell you is one of the best things you can do on social media is simply to listen and pay attention to what other people are saying. And in fact, it can be very educational to be attentive to things that are important for you to be watching. And I will tell you that just like people do in person, people congregate online in different areas. So just like your college campus probably has places like people huddle, like the cafeteria or the library, or places where people get together, there's also those places where people get together online. And it's very different based on geography, where you live, and it's also different based on what you're interested in. So you will find that there are some platforms that are really interesting. If you're a photographer, you may be hanging out on Google+. while the rest of us are like, didn't that die 5 years ago? But there are places where people get together and they talk, and some are geared based on age, some are geared based on where they live. And I do a lot of coordination of virtual operations support teams where we respond to disasters and pay attention to what is the public saying in the area of the disaster. And we actually use like geocoded searches so that we're looking in the particular area. We might be looking at a bigger band around that area, and then we might be looking at the whole United States to see kind of what the general conversation is about different disasters. And I'll give you a great example. When I worked the Umpqua Community College shooting a couple of years ago, I think that's about 2 years ago now. In fact, I think is today the anniversary. I believe today is the anniversary of it. Yes, or it's very close. So a couple years ago, of course, the active shooter went into the college area in Roseburg, Oregon, very rural area, not necessarily, like we would be here today. Went in, had the shooting situation, and one of my virtual teams was called in to provide support for that team. And what was interesting in that shooting situation was there was a number of copycat type threats that were occurring online in other schools around the area, not just at the Umpqua Community College. There was high school folks that were saying we want to carry out the mission of the initial responder or the initial shooter, and we closed down a number of different schools in response to threats that were made online and apathy towards the shooter that was involved. The other thing that happened was a lot of fake donation sites cropped up. There was everyone and their brother wanted to earn $1 off of that shooting, so they were selling T-shirts and candy bars and all sorts of things related to raising money for the victims. Some were legit and some were not, and so that was also something interesting to watch. The third thing that happened was President Obama at the time decided to visit Roseburg, Oregon. Now, politically, this was very interesting because Roseburg, Oregon is very conservative, and there was not a lot of love for his visit to the area of Roseburg. And so we had a number of different threats and a number of really vitriolic social media posts about if he comes here, we are going to respond through militia force and whatever. And then the fourth thing we had was the Westboro Baptist Church, one of my favorite churches, decided they were going to protest a lot of the funerals that were involved in that situation. And so one of the things that our virtual team did was look for those four things. Were there copycats? Were there needs in the community? What types of things were going on with donations? What kind of safety could we lend to what was happening with the funerals and the various types of protest activity? And then what could we do to work with? We worked with both the ATF and the FBI to ensure presidential safety during that visit to Roseburg. And so we provided what was called a listening report 2 to 3 times a day of everything that we found online in public sources about those 4 basic thoughts related to the Roseburg shooting. And those situation, we called them listening reports, ended up being shared with over 500 responders in that area on a regular basis to provide information about what was happening, what was the community saying, was there going to be protest activity or other types of threatening situations that had to be responded to. But what's important is that energy hubs in Roseburg are not the same as energy hubs in Portland, Oregon. Because you are a rural community, or the community is rural, they hubbed in very particular places on Facebook, different groups, different pages, different areas that are not necessarily Twitter, which happens in more urban areas. And we find some very specific divides on some of the platforms between urban and rural. The other thing that we do is on wildfires. We send a virtual team, or a virtual team works on wildfires throughout the nation. So while an emergency response team gets deployed to a wildfire, the first thing my virtual teams do is they do what we call a lay of the land and try to find those energy hubs of where people are communicating online. Sometimes it's on a newspaper, like there's a particular newspaper in town and everyone comments there. Sometimes it's the emergency response site. Sometimes it's a local mayor's Facebook page. It really depends on kind of where the community has gathered, where they're talking, and where they talk about their localized events. So it's important, if you have particular interest areas, that you find the energy hubs related to what it is you're interested in searching. The second thing I always say is make sure you know how to use the platforms. It's one thing to walk into a platform and be like, Twitter's the exact same as Facebook, so I'm going to connect them so everything I post on Facebook goes immediately to Twitter, right? Does anyone here do that? Oh, I'm so glad. A couple years back, people were doing that like mad. And I would say disconnect those two at all times, because the audiences you have in different platforms are different based on how people engage with the platform. When you are on Facebook, for example, you can scroll up and see someone's storyline, right? And pay attention to kind of what's interesting to them. And on Twitter, people get, I always call Twitter is like the cocktail party, where there's some people talking and you hear a group talking over here, you go join that conversation, and then you might hear someone else talking over here. And that's very much like what Twitter is in terms of conversation, at least when you're having conversation and not just listening. So it's important to know how to use the platform, and you can do that by watching and paying attention to how people communicate. The other thing I say is to explore niches. You don't have to listen to everything on social media. Does anyone here have Facebook friends that they'd rather turn off?
I do.
So do you turn them off? Yeah. Excellent. So I always say if you're engaged in social media and you don't like what you're seeing in front of you, you can change the channel, just like an old TV where we used to change the dial and change the channel and tune it in. So if you go to your social media feed and say, I don't really care for what people are saying, you can mute the conversation, you can mute the person so you don't even see them, you can still be friends with them, or you can delete them altogether.
But
Question?
you don't be able to seem to mute the ads.
You can't mute the ads because it's free. Someone has to pay for it. Question?
Are you concerned at all about social media bubbles, information bubbles?
So yes, and confirmation bias happens, right? But confirmation bias is going to happen on any type of platform when there's too much information. And the reason is really you cannot handle all of the information that's online all the time. And so what's important if you're using social media to gather your news and your worldview, you need to make sure that your world and your news view are very diverse, right? There are reasons why I still follow Fox News at the same time I follow CNN and Al Jazeera and all the other things that I follow, is because I want to know what people are focused on and how they're sharing information. The other thing is who all in here uses Google as their search bar all the time. So how many of you realize that your search results are influenced by what you search for on your Google toolbar? So it's important to understand that you shouldn't just be using Google. You should be using Google and Bing and different types of platforms that you're not training on a daily basis. Because when you go to Google and use it all the time, you are training Google with your own behavior. And I'm still trying to get my mom to understand this because she searches for like travel tickets at the exact same time, exact same day of the week, and she's always concerned that when she looks for travel tickets, the prices always go up. And I'm like, well, Mom, you're using Google. You're telling them you want to go to Scotland every Friday night at this date and time, and you're never going to get a lower price than what you saw last week because you are telling that search engine that you are a traveler that wants to go to Scotland on a regular basis, and no one in their right mind is going to discount that for you once they know you want to go. So the cost of using social media is that the way they pay for it is by harnessing all of your data. And when they harness your data, they narrow those ads and they narrow those things to you because they know that you are the target market of what you want to buy and purchase. So you have to intentionally diversify your connections online in order to get an actual picture that you can deal with. And so what's unfortunate is a lot of people don't realize that, and they like the confirmation bias, and they believe that Hillary should be going to jail tomorrow because every time they go and put Hillary into their search engine, it says she should go to jail in a jumpsuit. And so it's important to realize that if you are not diversifying your news intake, it is harder and harder to do that on a regular basis. You will get search results that are very much ordered and very much given to you based on your own news preferences that you are telling those online search engines about all the time. So I would say explore niches, but keep yourself diverse. The other thing you have to do online is evaluate source credibility. One of the biggest problems online is that we are visual creatures. So what happens when there's a tornado in Oklahoma and someone posts a picture of that tornado? How many people repost it like right away? Whoop, first picture of the tornado, right? Now what's the problem with that?
The tornado picture from 8 years ago.
Exactly right. In fact, has anyone seen the wildfire picture with the two deer standing on the freeway or standing on and there's a beautiful wildfire picture behind them, right? That's from Montana in 2001. Even the picture online is starting to get pixelated because it's been used so many times. And what people don't realize is that we are hungry to share visual imagery. We're hungry to be first, and we don't care if we're right all the time, and we're hungry to say, oh my gosh, look at what my friend just shared with me. And I get so irritated when I see that, Costco's going to give me $200 in free crap because I shared this, or a free airline ticket. No, they're not. If it sounds too good to be true, you need to put that right into a search engine, look up Snopes, and figure out when it was initially created back in 1940. I mean, it is ridiculous how people will share information quickly because they want to share good deals, they want to share images that are interesting, and they want to say, hey, look at this, and get the likes and the views and the shares from something they share spontaneously. Now, what's interesting is working in the disaster realm that I do, I can almost name you every tornado that I'm going to see in the first 5 minutes of an actual tornado hitting down. Those and hurricanes, I can almost spot them and be like, nope, that was Katrina. Nope, that was Hurricane Sandy. Nope. And the first 15 images that I see are almost always fake images. And the one that irritates me most, you really gonna get on my downside, the escalator picture in New York with the sharks at the bottom of the escalator. That is, fortunately, I think we've all come to learn that that's a fake image by now. But it still gets shared. Every time there's a hurricane in New York, people think there's a subway sharks at the bottom of the subway escalator. And so it's fascinating but you have to evaluate your source credibility. So it's important if you're looking at, I always say, if you're looking at a news article and it appears a little bit off or just like a little bit too out there, you got to click on the news and look at what other types of things it shares. So much fake news is out there this day and age that a lot of times it's a fake site that purports to share kind of onion-like news, and unfortunately people take it as regular news. And so it's really important to pay attention to that. So I'd say listen, lurk, and consume content. If you do nothing else on social media, watch and learn. Don't touch it. You don't have to say a word, but you can watch it. So what else can you do? Second thing I would say you can do is you can amplify the content of others. And one of the things that a lot of people do on social media is they love to share about themselves, right? Every post is me, 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 me. So let me throw a little bit of a scenario out to you. And let's say you go out on a blind date, right? Now, you go on a blind date and the person does nothing but talk about themselves all day long. Tell me what you think about that blind date when they're like, me, I'm all about me.
Then you don't want to be with them.
Why not?
Selfish.
They're selfish.
Selfish, right?
Yeah.
Right?
What's the content?
What's the content? And do they care about me at all, right? Well, think about a number of how folks share online, right? There's a whole bunch of blind dates out there and a whole bunch of egocentric people who are like, here's what I did. Hey, here's what I did. And so what's really important is that when you're defining your own reputation and your own credibility is that you have to minimize the ego. Because I will tell you, your life is nowhere near as interesting as you personally think it is. And same with me. My life's not that interesting. I just laugh that people even follow it half the time because I'm neurotic on Twitter. I'll share like 3 days in a row and then not share for 3 months. I mean, I go back and forth and I share anything and everything. But what's interesting is we are very in tune with what we like and what we know, right? But you are also a brand evaluator. You are in the community. You are interacting with consumer experiences. You can share what you like and not like with others. You can also amplify the content of others, saying, hey, this person posted something great and I think you should read it. Because I would tell you that, as putting my government hat on for a moment, if I as government tell you something, you are probably 79% likely to throw it directly in the garbage, maybe 99%. Because I'm a government employee, you have no idea who I am, and for the most part, people distrust government, right? But if your friend or family member shares the exact same information that I do, you are almost 100 times more likely to trust and to believe that information than if it was shared by an anonymous source. And so what's important is that even if you don't think you influence a sphere, you influence all of your friends, family, and the folks who admire you because you say something in the community, far more than I ever will in an official capacity. And so it's always been one of the sort of caveats of my role as an educator during disasters is how do I get people talking about how to be safe directly with their family members and friends and the people who influence them. Because I can tell you all day long to get prepared for the Cascadia earthquake, and most of you are going to be like, I don't know, maybe. If I have some extra dollars, I might buy some canned food. But if your friend and family member says, you know what, you need to have 3 days worth of canned goods in your garage, you probably will have a much harder time saying that that's hogwash, right? So I would say you amplify the content of others. It also defines what you find valuable. What you share online says something about your values, right? If I share only things in a particular vein, whether it be liberal or conservative, you're going to know or think you know about what is important to me, right? If I am sharing nothing but a particular type of social cause, then you will think, well, that's important to her. Now, if you agree or disagree with that social cause, is then influences how close we probably are as friends in the real world. And it can also define whether or not you want to be friends with someone. You can see people share something and be like, oh no, honey, that was no. And it's really important to understand that what you are sharing can be divisive, even among your friends and family members, even if you don't intend it to be. One of the biggest things shared on social media are pictures of what?
Food.
Babies, food, two other categories, cats. What's the third category? Dogs, politics. That is unfortunately, but not what I'm looking for. What other is the biggest? If I were to say, you look across social media, 3 things people share. Selfies. Yeah. Seasonal. You missed travel, which is interesting. So the top 3 are food, travel, and cats, or animal pictures. And why do you think those 3 are probably the most popular among things that are shared?
Other people like to see.
You got it. It's neutral, right? Do you have to like my politics or my religious beliefs in order to like food, travel, or cats? No. But what happens when you share things about politics, religion, or social causes? You divide your audience immediately. And so back in the early days of social media, people were like, social media is all about food. All we share is food, right? But the reality is a lot more people will like my food picture than will like my political post. Because immediately when you see a political post, it puts you into one of 2 camps. You either like it or you hate it. And there is not a whole lot of gray area. Same happens with religion. It's just what happens at the holidays. You stay out of those danger categories when you're defining some of the wanting to bring people in. So if you're looking to gather an audience and gather SEO and people that are clicking and liking your links, you have to do things that are consistent with your mission, but also aren't going to divide your audience. Because if you're dividing your audience, you're automatically making people choose whether or not to like you based on the divisiveness of those posts. The other thing that you can find is audiences of similar interests, right? The great thing about social media is if I love soccer and I love knitting, I can find my soccer enthusiasts and I can find my knitting enthusiasts and I can shut the rest of the world out. And so it's important to understand that you need to begin to kind of look for audience members of areas in which you want to be, whether it's the job you want to have, whether or not it's the area you want to live in, whether or not it's the businesses you want to engage in. You need to find those niche audiences. When I worked as the emergency manager up here at Cressa, I followed every business in Southwest Washington. And what was interesting about following every business is I could tune into whether or not businesses around me were doing preparedness events, right? So if I did my own preparedness events, there was a certain cost. I had to set up the venue. I had to get people to work the venue. I had to market and advertise the venue in order for people to come to my events. When I started following all of the businesses in Southwest Washington, I found that there was a brewery, Doomsday Brewing, and then there was another one that was hosting disaster events on a regular basis and partnering with the U.S. Geological Service. And all I had to do was call them and join their event for free. And it took 1 staff member to reach far more audience than the 20 staff members it did to host my own event where we saw the same 10 people show up all the time. And so it's really important to tune in to those you think might be your audience and those that you can leverage for being able to save yourself money. The other thing is that it minimizes your ego. If I'm sharing your content instead of my own, people aren't like, wow, she's a real egomaniac. Now, they still might say that for other reasons, but if you are sharing the content of others or amplifying it, you're sharing the stage, so to speak, with other people. So the third thing I want to say is that you can also on social media produce interesting content. And I will say, don't be a sheep. I just told you to amplify the content of others, but you don't need to amplify the same thing that everyone else shares, right? And you can tell what's popular when people start sharing and you see the exact same thing shared over and over and over again. But when people are sharing over and over the same types of information, it's not that interesting. And so what was everyone sharing yesterday? Halloween costumes, right? And how many of the Halloween costumes that went across your feed did you click like on? A couple. So think back to the ones that you liked and the relationship you had with the people you liked. Tell me if, did that matter at all in terms of which ones you liked versus didn't? I'm seeing nodding back there. In what way?
I just didn't have time to do people I wasn't really close with. I didn't really care, to be honest. I was another kid in a costume, but if it was somebody I loved, it was like nice to see.
Right, absolutely.
I didn't care.
And that is exactly what happens. So when people start doing memes and sharing similar types of stories, what gets really interesting is we get information overloaded. We say, I'm only going to really click like 2 or 3 times. And it's going to be the people I care about or the ones that I really want to say, hey, I like that content or information. So there's also a timeline to liking information. So sometimes you'll see a meme, right? People will kind of dress up and do the same music video, and they all kind of do it the same way. And there's sort of time windows on when that is cool. And usually those time windows are about 24 hours. They're not much longer than 24 hours. But what I will see people do is several weeks or days later, because they spent the production time to create the image, they'll post their video, and it's 2 weeks too late for that meme. Really good example I have. Does anyone see live the very first Sharknado? The very first one, and I mean the real first one, not the 5th or 6th one. Yeah. The first time Sharknado went live. Was anyone watching it on Twitter at the time?
No idea.
I know what you're talking about.
Okay. Oh my goodness. So there was a movie with virtually no budget called Sharknado, and I think it was on Discovery Channel, it was on cable. Sci-fi, right. So the first one was on Sci-fi, right?
Yeah.
A no budget movie, literally sharks in a tornado, right? So unrealistic. But what was interesting was on Twitter at the exact same time, the American Red Cross, as long as a number of emergency managers, started sharing information right away about Sharknado. And they got into this huge conversation, and Sharknado ended up trending on Twitter and becoming really, really a significant conversation. So much so that Sharknado 2 actually got a budget. I mean, it was so, there was so much conversation. Now, in the emergency management community, for those of us that jumped right in, I didn't even have cable at the time, but I was playing along, like just watching it on Twitter and when people are posting, and I'm like, wow, this movie has to be something else. It's kind of interesting. So 4 or 5 days later, emergency managers tried to have a conversation about Sharknado, and no one tweeted back. But it was because they did it too late. The meme was open for those 2 hours, and people wanted to talk about sharks and tornadoes and the realism of whether or not that could really happen. And a week later, it was like, we're on to the next movie. It doesn't really matter to us anymore. But you have to be, it's all about opportunity and understanding the window of time that you have to be unique and creative and jump into a meme situation.
Can you repeat that a little slower, please?
So yeah, I appreciate you calling me out. No, you have to be attentive to the window of time that you have around a pop culture event as to when it's popular. And if it's no longer popular, or you're asking yourself the next day, is anyone else still talking about it? If you can't find anyone talking about that, the meme is over. I mean, it really has to be. Is it still the water cooler? Is it still something that people are sharing on a regular basis? Because those time windows, that sometimes can be longer, but often are very short. Question?
I was just going to ask if being an early adopter into a certain type of subject might help with being part of the conversation, or being an early adopter in something that you might think might be trending in the future.
Yep.
Like, how does that play out?
It can be, but I will tell you what's interesting is if you're an early adopter and kind of into the market early, then about probably 9 times out of 10, it's not going to work for you. Because what happens is, it's a proximity. I mean, there's like a formula of your proximity to the event, when it becomes popular, and what you share about it in that window of time. And I will tell you, I'll give a personal story that's kind of funny. I came home one day to my neighborhood, and there was a sinkhole in my street. And what was really interesting, it was a little tiny sinkhole, like about that big. And if you look down, it went deep. Like you could have parked a car in there. It was so deep. So as an emergency manager for Clark County, I posted a picture and said, my street's falling apart. Well, because of my connections in emergency management, I immediately had folks at high levels of FEMA responding back saying, we'll send you the National Guard, don't worry, stand by. We got in this really funny conversation about my sinkhole on the street. Well, what was interesting, I was off the clock. I wasn't an emergency manager at that moment. I mean, because you're always an emergency manager. But I was having this kind of fun conversation with folks very high up in FEMA and some of my National Guard friends about, hey, we're getting everything to you. Well, the next day, my boss got a call from the Clark Public Works Director. No, it was the Public Information Office, wondering why I was the PIO on a sinkhole incident out in East Vancouver. And so I get called into my boss's office, and they said, did you take over the PIO responsibilities, the public information responsibilities for the sinkhole, and getting the National Guard involved? And I'm like, no. I'm like, this was the sinkhole literally on my street. Well, it ended up being on the front page of the Columbian the next day, which was hilarious. It was great. They got it fixed really quickly. Public Works was out within literally an hour of my tweeting about it and having this conversation. So I got really fast response, but I almost literally got in career trouble because I had jumped roles into something that I wasn't supposed to be taking point on, because in emergency response, public information officers are supposed to be the ones communicating with the public. So that was pure proximity for me. It was my street, it was my picture, and and it was my friends that were getting me in all sorts of trouble. But I share that to say, what's interesting about large disaster events is the people who become popular in sharing news and information are often the ones that are on the scene of the incident to begin with. And so when a shooting takes place or a very significant disaster, the news media is glomming on to people that are there right at the time of the event. And if you are sharing prime information during an emergency event, your phone will blow up with direct messages from local news media saying, can I get rights to that picture? Can I get rights to that? Can I interview you? Can I give you your 15 seconds of fame? And sometimes that's too much for people, because what happens is they become like, all I did was see the tornado there, but because they have the initial picture of it, the media jumps in very quickly to take rights away from people so that they're sharing the key picture and the image from that person individually. So there's pros and cons to having that proximity sometimes. But I will also say, be authentically you. There are people out there that try to be someone else, right? They try to fashion that image. They try to fashion I'm super popular. I'm successful in everything I do. And the reality is, none of us have time or trust to believe that anyone's perfect. And so it's important to own that there are times where your day isn't as great as you're sharing online. And also important to realize that there's a lot of people that all they do is share the positive. So if you're feeling envy or fear of missing out because all of your friends seem to be having fun and you aren't, realize they're selectively sharing what they're sharing online that they either want their mom to see or want someone else to see that's important to them, but is not always the picture of who they are. And people are not very quick to own responsibility for the bad things they do. And if they are, a lot of times they can have problems with that too. So it's important to be authentic, be real, stand behind your messages, and share interesting content.
Well, it's too easy just because we live in an age where you can be completely anonymous out there anymore. So a lot of people just don't take responsibility for what they say.
Yep.
It's scary to be authentic because to be authentic is to be vulnerable.
Yes.
It's I'm surprised I might even have a single friend left on my Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
It's
oh yeah.
Because I'm a little bit too authentic.
Well, and there's a difference. Let me say, there's a difference between being authentic and being an oversharer and wanting to drag people into your drama. So I will say that there are people that go over that line of sharing too much about what they need to keep private and really work through, and how fast people want to share. One of the big instances that I see dealing in the trauma world is how quickly people share death information, right? Mm-hmm. They automatically want to share the rest in peace so-and-so because I know they're dead, I heard it minutes ago. And a lot of times that causes huge problems for the family, the immediate family of the person who died, because they're busy trying to make the phone calls to anyone and everyone that was connected to that person, and they do not have the luxury of having a lot of time to do that. Because if you're online, you're seeing it from cousin Gina, and you're not able to get the direct message because it is really hard to get that message out. And I now, trauma intervention folks, they call me regularly to come kind of train the trauma intervention volunteers about how to deal with social media in death type of situations. Because the problem is, in death situations, as a volunteer, you have to be very cognizant of the fact you might become the public information officer for that family who can't process their phone buzzing away with all the different notifications they're getting from people reaching out. So it's a really interesting time for that. Any other questions? I should check my time because I do talk over sometimes.
Are we going to be talking about cooking with Cheryl or no?
Oh, maybe. I don't actually have a slide in here. Well, this would be a good time for it. So I told or the red stapler story. There's so many stories. So I talk about being authentic and sharing information. And when I first got into social media, I shared a lot about disaster and emergency management, right? That was my career. That was the mission. That was anything and everything that I needed to share online. Well, probably, I think it was 2010-ish. I set a pan of hard-boiled eggs, or a pan of eggs, on my stove, and aimed to boil them in a pot of water, making myself some hard-boiled eggs. And I promptly got involved in an art project upstairs in my house. I heard a huge boom. The eggs exploded everywhere, cracked really good, and there was an overwhelming smell of burning hair. So it was a terrible, terrible smell. So I took a picture of the eggs and actually shared the picture of the eggs with the hashtag Cooking with Cheryl. And that actually got more engagement and conversation about cooking stuff. And then every time, so I'm not a great cook. I'm good at a lot of things, but I'm not good at cooking. And so now I just share my disaster food stories occasionally under the hashtag. If you look at Cooking with Cheryl, you will find many of my fails, like the time I turned macaroni and cheese, the box kind, into soup unintentionally. Tried to make my kids eat it, and the neighbor finally told me it was junk. So my kids were like, no one else eats macaroni and cheese this way? So we no longer eat mac and cheese in my house. The one little offshoot was when I did gumbo with Cheryl, because I thought it was a bucket list item. I really wanted to make gumbo. Love New Orleans, wanted to try to make gumbo, but I don't read the recipes. And so when I read the gumbo recipe, I got all the instructions together. I didn't realize you had to stir gumbo for 3 hours straight. So during those 3 hours, I tweeted while I stirred and did my gumbo. And that was the night that Andrew Zimmern of Bizarre Food started following me. And then I got scared because I'm like, oh, Andrew Zimmern's following me. So now he's going to look at my Cooking with Cheryl stories, and I'm going to be in all sorts of trouble. So now my friends just harass me. Anytime they have a bad cooking fail, they hashtag it cooking with whoever they are, and I laugh appropriately. And so I went to my boss the next day, actually, and just was like, I quit my job as a disaster manager. I said, all I want to do is just tweet food pictures now, because that is what the public cares about. But the reality was, it was a topic that everyone could engage with, because everyone has their bad food story, right? No one gave a crap about emergency preparedness at the same level that they did about cooking. And so, a lot of times when we talk about disaster preparedness, people want to put their head in the ground because they don't want to think about the day that a disaster happens, because that is a day that life doesn't go as normal. So they don't want me reminding them that, hey, the earthquake could happen and we could all be stranded. But if I talk about food, we're all good. So that's actually a good segue into my engage slide. The other thing that's important to do on social media is to actually engage with people. It is one thing to lurk and watch news pass you by. It's a totally different thing to engage with people and develop some of those relationships online that turn into offline relationships. And I will tell you that I'm probably here today because of engaging with Bruce on Twitter. And many years ago, do you remember when we first started talking?
2010?
2010, probably. So one of the things that a lot of my friends that I engage with on a regular basis today are folks that I initially met on Twitter in the 2008 to 2011 timeframe. And what we did, there were so many of us that were learning how to use social platforms that we started a Friday coffee get-together called the Coov Cool Kids. If you ever look at that hashtag, there's actually a Facebook page called the Coov Cool Kids. And we said we're neither cool, and we're neither Coov kids. I mean, some people are from Portland. But we got together Friday afternoons in and around Vancouver. Our goal was to meet at a local coffee shop. And we would get folks anywhere from about 15 to 20 folks, sometimes as high as 50 or 60 folks, who would get together for an hour, just talk and meet and talk about how to use social media. And many of my friends today are people that I met connecting with them offline after some initial online conversation. And so it's really important. I used to keep a tally of how many people I've met across the United States and actually the globe now from meeting on social media. And I stopped when I got to about 400 of folks that I met initially online first and had turned those into offline relationships as well. And they're super cool because they're people we met under getting to know each other because we had similar interests, right? And you'll find it's very rare that when you're talking with someone regularly online that you find that they're different in public. Now, I will say there are occasional situations where you'll meet someone online and they do not live up socially to how they are online. So they're much more comfortable talking in an online manner, and then you meet them in person and they can't carry a conversation. I would say that's maybe 1 out of 50 for me, because a lot of times I gather a lot about their personality based on how they communicate and what types of things they share. So, but I have had those awkward experiences where you meet them in person and you're like, really? I'm the same way pretty much, online, offline. But some people really struggle and feel more comfortable in the offline or in the online persona. So it does happen. What is interesting, though, if you're a business, is how you can leverage social media to find people that are interested in what you do. And I shared these pictures because I got to go be a social media VIP at NASA last year for the creation of the OSIRIS-REx satellite, which is the thing in the your right-hand side, the satellite that was there. And what NASA does really well is NASA has social events. And if you follow the hashtag NASA social and you're like a total space junkie, they will invite like 25 people from social media to attend their events, their special VIP events because they know those 25 to 50 people are going to tweet like mad minions about whatever they get to experience at NASA. So for this event, I got invited to go to Colorado and go to Northrop Grumman, where they were creating this create this satellite, and they don't even allow their employees in to take pictures, but they allowed all of us that were the social media VIPs in to have lunch with their scientists, which was super cool. We got to see all sorts of just geeky science stuff, and there were kids as young as, one blogger was 8 years old, and folks up to about 70, 80 probably was the oldest person that was there. And they took us all around, and employees kept saying to us all day long, they don't even let us in that area. Like, they don't let us in there. But they knew that they could control the environment for us, show us what they wanted to see, and we were going to sit there on our phones constantly and share that information out with the world. And they had so much free press from people with huge followings that they don't even have to pay for marketing anymore. They're like, all we do is we pay for lunch, and we open up our doors. We all had to pay our own way to get there, but of course we were science junkies. Who wouldn't pay for a ticket to Colorado to go hang out with NASA for a day? So I will tell you, if you are super interested in science, you need to be watching for NASA social events. They actually have invited people to space shuttle launches, satellites. There was actually a follow-up one to this where they actually got to see the launch of this OSIRIS-REx. And you get to really cool. We got such a cool bag of swag from NASA. It was awesome. So there are a number of cool things that you can do online to engage with folks. Now, the way NASA judged it is they looked at how we engage with folks on a regular basis. I had to fill out a one-page application and say, who's my audience? Who do I speak to? Well, I speak to government people. I speak to a lot of college students in a lot of different sectors. And then they look at your following counts to see, how do you engage with folks? And are these people that are actually going to share content that they see, or are they going to sit there on a bus and just follow along and not really share with the community? So if you are an engager, there's so many cool ways and fun things to do online. And I don't think I do have some pictures later on. So now we're going to talk about what you should do. So we'll kind of cross into what you should do if you're engaging online. And these are all story-based, which is going to be fun. I spent more time on those slides than I intended to. But we're first going to talk about the first thing you should do if you're engaged in social media is how many folks are here using business platforms. Like, you have a business voice that is your agency or organization. Mostly all personal, so the rest of you all have personal voices. So it's important to understand that your business reputation has to have a different voice from your personal reputation. And the reason is a business is not one person. I mean, maybe you are, if you're an LLC or you're a single person, slight variances in that. But when I work as Clackamas 911, I have to have the voice of the 911 community and the voice of my world of 911. I can't get on there and put a Cooking with Cheryl post unless, of course, I've had to call out the fire department to help me get my fire out. But I have to really think about what's important to folks from a 911 perspective. So there's just different things you share and different things that you develop. But if you're an individual, most of your individuals engaging online, it's important to have a clean reputation because people look at that reputation. Someone over here mentioned applying for jobs and what people look at. And I will tell you that it is illegal to judge an applicant based on their social media engagement. Now, I will tell you that officially, but then I will tell you how many HR departments I talk to where everyone has surfed LinkedIn, Facebook, a number of different social media platforms, seeing if they could find you and seeing what you share online. And so it is really important. As my daughter and I are talking about her social media reputation, there's a couple of basic rules. I will never share pictures that have alcohol in them because I'm a government employee and I get in trouble if I'm drinking on the job. And so there are certain things where I know in my profession that is considered a boundary. I will also never use the last names of employees that work at my organization because they have the right to share their own information online. And so I do not tag employees to say, hey, look, here's my 911 dispatcher. They work here. I will use their first name, but I will not use first and last names. I will also, as a public safety agency, not share the address of my organization. And the reason we don't do that is if you search hard enough, you can find it. Not a big deal. But I don't need to physically put it out there from my business side reputation. The other personal rules that I have is that I also don't share information on platforms about my children that publicly are accessible to other people. Now, that being said, I share a lot about my kids on Facebook, but I only accept friend requests from people that know my children or people I would trust with my children. I will not accept stranger friend requests on Facebook because I simply don't know you. And I talk it a lot. I get a lot of Facebook requests from people that interact with after I talk. But the reality is, for my children's safety, I will not share their information. I also never use my children's names online. You will never see me call them by their first or last name because I don't want it in any searchable index. I will also never check into their school. I will never check into an event that they are at. I will never check in within a 20-mile proximity of where my children are at any given point in time. And I get really annoyed by parents who put their date of birth for their kids and their height and weight information and all sorts of, hey, look, I've got a new grandbaby. Their name is, Janie Lee Simmons. And you're like, why would you ever do that? It gives identity thieves an instant opportunity to steal that name before your kid even has their first Social Security card. So I am very protective of my children, love them greatly, but I want them to have their own personal choice of how to engage online. And so my daughter finds it hilarious. She's always searching herself to see if she can find herself online. And she's like, Mom, the only people with my name are like old people. Like, she has a very kind of older sounding name, so it's all the tombstones that pop up with her name from years ago. But she's very proud of the fact that she can search her name and she cannot find herself online. She searches me too and lets me know if there's things online about me. And I actually set a Google alert for myself and search my own name in quotes because there are people that have the name Cheryl Bledsoe. And actually, there's a woman in Tennessee who shares my name who has a warrant out for her arrest all the time. So I know that when I go speak in Tennessee, I have to be careful that, like, not that Cheryl, thanks, But it is important to be, especially if you have a generic name, not as important. But if you have a specific name, it's important to understand what people are sharing about you online and what they are sharing about your family. So I say develop a reputation, but guard your reputation. Yeah.
So when it comes to people trying to check you out on your social media, is it enough that you don't use your real name on there?
No, I use my real name. I absolutely do. I also set my permissions on Facebook so no one can tag me without my permission. So if you try to tag me in something, it'll give me a notice that says you were tagged in this, and then I have the choice of whether or not to accept that tag. So it is really important, and I will tell you, if you're engaging on Facebook, you need to do the privacy check on your Facebook every 3 months, because Facebook is in the business of sharing your world and sharing it with as many people as possible, because that is how they get their marketers, which means you need to go in and do the security check, make sure all the settings are either only you or to people that you want to see it. And then the other thing that you need to do is you need to view your profile as an outsider. And in the safety check in Facebook, you can look at what your page looks like as an outsider. And what a lot of people forget is that cover photos and profile pictures are always public in Facebook. So if you have a cover picture and like 60 people have commented on it, they can presume that those 60 people are friends or connections of yours. So it is important to go and hide every one of the old ones from your timeline. So the only 2 things that should be public on your Facebook page are your current profile pic and your current cover pic. Everything else you should be hiding from people that are trying to find you. And so those are just some of my safety guidelines. But I think it's really important to be attentive to, you own your reputation, but you also need to be cognizant of sharing other people's reputations. So if people are tagging you in the drunken Friday night pictures, it is real important to own who sees what, because a lot of times Facebook allows not only your friends to see it, but friends of friends you have in common, which means that someone can see that picture that you may not intend to see that picture. And so it's important to think about that. Yeah.
And just with the safety guidelines, I've seen some people that post when they're going on vacation and when they're out of town. They post exact dates when they're leaving their house.
Yep.
And
there's a great website, and I don't know if it's still up and around, but if you go to pleaserobme.com, please rob
that's
me.
pretty much what you're doing.
Well, Please Rob Me was set up as a Twitter bot that grabs that type of data and posts it to pleaserobme.com that basically says these people are not home right now. So that website, I don't know if it still exists, but it used to. So when people would post publicly available information about whether or not they were out of town, it would just, the Twitter bot would grab it, pull it, and put it on this website. And so you could get a whole list of all the addresses in your area. And it was even searchable at one point where you could say, hey, I'm in Vancouver, Washington, who's all sharing here. So it's important to understand that bots are set up all the time on the internet to share your information. And that's why these websites stay free, and that's why there are risks involved for your participation. Questions?
Please Rob Me is still up.
Yeah, what's that? Still up? Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a good one. There's a number of funny ones I might end up sharing. I probably shouldn't do it all on camera, but I am who I am. Second thing I'd say you should do on social media is you should be an awesome customer. You are engaging with consumer type interactions every single day of your life. And I will tell you, the smart businesses are already engaging on social media, and they are already looking for customers of theirs. And my husband had a great experience just yesterday where he went to 2 ATMs. He was depositing some cash. went to 2 ATMs of his credit union, and they did not, the ATMs wouldn't accept his money. And he gets off work late at night, and he was frustrated, so he tweeted out, dear credit union, you do this, I'm having a real hard time depositing my money. Well, his credit union didn't respond, but another credit union did. And another credit union said, here's our online application. Our ATMs work all the time. They do this and that. He is now a client of that credit union. And I had to laugh because I had the same almost Twitter experience with the same credit union a number of years ago because I was frustrated. I had a conversation with this same credit union. And when I went into their branch and said, hey, I had a social media conversation, I was told these would be the terms of this engagement. And they said, oh, we don't really talk to our social media guy. And I'm like, well, I get it, but your social media guy talked to me. And so it's really important to understand that you have customer rights and can engage online. I have Wendy's and Delta up there for 2 great examples of this, a little bit older examples, but I fly a lot. I go talk to people kind of all over the world about social media. So I am a regular customer. Alaska Airlines is my favorite, if they're listening, but Delta was the one I was flying in this story. And I take my Kindle with me. I read a lot when I'm on planes. And I had left my Kindle on a seat and walked out of the plane. I was catching a really short connection in Chicago. And ran out of the plane, got over to my other connection, got onto the plane, and then was like, oh no, I left my Kindle behind. And so I actually tweeted at Delta Airlines, said I left my Kindle on this flight and at this seat. I think it was like D3, right? Delta Airlines actually grabbed that Kindle and got it on my plane so that when I got to the destination, it came to the customer service desk of the same place where I was flying to in Florida. So I didn't even have to call in and say, hey, can you track it down? It had already made it. So that was super cool. And it's important to understand that anytime you fly an airlines that's engaged with Twitter, they are far easier to deal with than any customer service desk. And I deal with the Twitter folks all the time with regards to flying planes, because I will tell you, all major airlines have a whole customer service group that are simply watching the conversations that happen on Twitter. And so, you see a bad situation happen online, it happens, the conversation goes offline very quickly with that. Second conversation I had was at Wendy's. Not a conversation. I went through a drive-through. It was Sunday night. I had one of my kids going to camp the next day, and we had been busy all day long. And so I go through. I had taken my son through a Wendy's drive-through earlier in the day as we were doing a whole bunch of errands. And so by the time I picked my daughter up in the evening, she was like, "Oh, you got my brother Wendy's. I'd really like to have Wendy's too." Well, I knew what she wanted was only about $3, and I didn't have much cash left. I had one single dollar bill, and so I said, well, figure out if you can find $2.19 in the console. I'll drive by Wendy's and get the 3 for $3 meal or whatever it was she wanted. And so she grabbed $3, so we had $3.19. One was a single dollar, and the other was the $2.19 in change. So we pull up to the drive-thru, and I hand over. I said, I'm sorry to give you change. Really, really sorry. And the woman took it. And her manager walked by and said, I'm sorry, we can't take change. And wouldn't allow us to take the food home. So the food was literally in the bag right there. And so I took a picture of my daughter, I think, her sad face, and said something to the effect of, Wendy's just lost a customer for not accepting $2.19 in change. And so, of course, people were like, oh my gosh, what happened? Well, my friends, because I've been involved in social media for so long, took it upon themselves to figure out which Wendy's I was at. That store had a very significant influx of people who showed up the next day with change to pay for money. And people called the store demanding the manager's resignation. The manager was like, hey, chill, we're good. I actually ended up getting a call the very next day. Well, actually, I got several calls. I got one call from the news media who wanted to air the story last night and interview me in front of the Wendy's for their inability to accept change. And my basic issue was if they don't accept change from me, what about the homeless guy that got maybe $2 and they should be able to get a burger just like anyone with $2 bills, right? And so the media wanted to interview me, and I said, well, hold on. I really don't want to be on the Channel 6 News tonight for a $2.19 Wendy's situation. That's kind of, no thanks. Didn't feel right. I just wanted a burger, and my kid was kind of sad. So, and I said, I also wanted to give Wendy's the opportunity, because I tweeted right at Wendy's. I shared and said, hey, you lost a customer today over $2.19. Hope it was worth it to you. And that started, there was a bunch of conversation on Twitter, a bunch of conversation on Facebook. I got a call from the regional vice president the next day, just after the news media had called, profusely apologizing to me, also asked to apologize to my daughter since it was food for her, and he also sent me a $100 gift card for the experience. Wow. And I didn't ask for it, didn't ask for anything involved, but said, he really appreciated it. And I tried to aim to be gracious in that situation because I'm like, I really don't need anything. I just appreciate the apology because the bigger concern in my mind was what is the store's policy on accepting change, right? Yeah. Because money is money. It's all legal tender, and until money's really devalued to such an extent that we can't use it anymore, so that's more of a policy issue. So just assure me that your people are trained that they'll accept money of any kind. So we actually, my daughter and I, decided to use that $100 to drive through Wendy's drive-thrus and pay for everyone behind us. So for the next rest of the summer, we paid for people at Wendy's drive-thru. We would go through and get the 50-cent Frosty, and then we'd pay for every car that was in the drive-thru line. And we got to do that like 6 times, which was awesome. And the people just didn't know how to handle it. They're like, what? And I'm like, every order. I want every order to swipe it, make sure it goes through, and just tell them to have a great day and pass it on. So we didn't use very much of that $100 for ourselves, but the reality was we were able to pass on a great deed, and we actually shared those posts back to the Wendy's manager to say we really appreciate it and thank them for their time. So that being said, I still eat at Wendy's today, so still very much a customer. But the important part of this story is that every one of us has a customer service voice. We are engaging, and for the most part in customer service businesses, all they hear is the negative, right? They get the negative comment cards, they get the complaints, they hardly ever get the positives. And so it's really important if you're having positive experiences, take that 5 seconds and share it with friends. Share it and say, hey, this is a great business, great locally owned business, or great folks to deal with, because people do take your recommendations, particularly in that friends and family network that we've already talked about. So be a great customer on the good side and the bad side. And folks know that they get very straight dealings with me.
Whoever runs Wendy's account is a genius, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Twitter account.
Well, I have to tell you, my favorite is KFC. Do you guys know what KFC is doing right now? They only follow like 11 people, right? So what's their slogan about spices?
11 herbs and spices.
11 herbs and spices in their chicken, right? So they follow like 2 spices and 11 herbs. And so literally that's it. The literally guy's name Herb they follow. And so they follow herbs and spices. So there's a lot of great.
Arby's is really good.
Yep.
It's all like obscure video games or movies or shows.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm glad that has a happy ending because I love Wendy's. I was sitting there the whole time going, no. Yeah. But I mean that's the power of your stories like that, right? And you're like, oh. And so it is really important to share. And it's always nice to get that positive. So few people get the positives in this day and age. In a world where social media is really negative, it is really important to share the good stuff too. So another thing you could do is crowdsource solutions to problems. And one of the things that's really important to understand is we don't always have the answers to everything, right? There are problems that come into our world, and there are situations where we're like, I don't know what to do with this, but the community can help you do it if you engage with them in such a way that you have those conversations. So I have some pictures of MREs up there because this is a really interesting story in my world. When I was at Cressa as an emergency manager, I got a call from the jail, and the jail calls me and says, we prepared for disasters long ago, but our MREs, we've got 60 cases of these MREs in order to feed all the inmates at the Clark County Jail, but they're expiring in like 3 months. And so I'm planning to drop them off outside your door so you can figure out something to do with them. And I'm like, 60 cases of MREs? No, thank you. I mean, that's great, but an expiring food, I don't need it. And so I sent out the traditional email to a bunch of different organizations and said, 60 pallets of MREs, someone help me do something with this. And as typical email responders do, I got zipped in 2 weeks. And I'm like, this deadline's crunching. They're going to drop these and fill my office with MREs, and I really don't need them to do that. And so I put it out on Twitter. I said, I've got 60 pallets of MREs. Someone give me their best idea. And within 5 minutes, I had 3 different solutions, and 2 of them willing to come pick them up directly from the jail and distribute them to homeless populations along the coast and along in the Portland area. And so within like 5 minutes, I solved my problem and said, here's the person you call. I connected with them. They came and picked them up from the jail and were able to distribute them to people who could actually use them within the 3-month time period. Yeah.
So is crowdsourcing just asking questions online?
Crowdsourcing is saying, here's the problem. Here's the scenario. What do I need? Give me your best idea. Bruce actually did this not too long ago. I think you were doing a presentation and you asked the community of what you should wear for that presentation.
Yes.
I I will tell you.
And you had some very interesting suggestions.
Everything crocheted that I could find on the internet was in Bruce's timeline. I'm like, here's what you should wear.
Some of them would have been rather.
So sometimes it's important to understand the world may not give you the answers you're looking for, and I sort of make habit of doing that when people ask silly crowdsourcing questions like that.
I blocked you.
Like,
wasn't there something like Brody McBoatface or something like that?
Yeah. Oh yeah, they asked to name a boat, right? That's the really famous story. They asked the crowd to name a boat, and they had to name it Bodie McBoatface because that was the one that got the most votes in the public forum. So it is really important to understand that what the public gives you back may not be something that you can commit to as an organization. But what is important to understand is that a lot of folks have been using social media to solve crime and criminal situations. In fact, one of the very first law enforcement responders that I became friends with up in Toronto, Canada, began using Twitter as a way to report graffiti-type situations or identify using Twitter to find pictures of graffiti in his local community and then actually engaging with folks about how to clean it up. And so he ended up working with a number of different folks, a number of kids and youth, even some at-risk youth, to help go clean up graffiti instead of actually causing the graffiti. And so he ended up brought a number of folks in, and they created actual real murals over areas that had graffiti up in Toronto, Canada, and beautified some spaces out of areas in which people were kind of doing it out of boredom. Yes?
I was able to, with social media, my car had gone through a ditch, and I was able to get help.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so it's important to understand that people, and particularly on Twitter, people are fast to act, much more fast than they are on Facebook. And in fact, there's been studies that have been done over various types of social media. And they say that the friends that you have on Twitter are typically some of the most active, meaning that they will take action within 30 minutes of seeing a need that is online. Whereas on Facebook, you can post that same need. You may not get any response because of the timeline and the way people see it. They might not actually see it till a couple of days later based on the algorithms that are in Facebook. And so it is important to understand that on Twitter, the connections are much more loose. I am much more likely to follow people I don't know on Twitter than I am on Facebook, but I am far more likely to probably do something for someone on Twitter than on Facebook. I'm going to talk about a couple of those examples coming up, maybe even next. Oh, no, I'll talk about buying my house. So have you guys had Dale come talk to you yet? See you next week? Couple weeks. All right. Dale's awesome. You will love him. Dale was one of the first people that I started following in social media. And Dale's in the real estate industry. And I actually learned a lot of my initial social media stuff through watching the real estate industry try to harness the power of social media for their use in real estate connections. And so it was funny because I'm going to tell a story about buying my current house. I came home one night, Wednesday night, and scared something out of my husband because I found a house that was like 2 doors down from me, and I'm like, I think I want to buy that house. And so I got on Twitter and I said, I think I'm going to need a mortgage broker and a real estate agent. And what was interesting was I got 5 direct messages in response to that, and 5 of them had the exact same name in it. It was Dale Chumbley. They're like, you need to talk to Dale Chumbley. And I'm like, well, that's funny. We're always following each other on Twitter. So I tweeted at him and said, hey, I think we need to meet in real life. And sure enough, he came over to my house the very next day. The house I wanted had sold out from under me, but that was okay. It was where the market was at the time, and we found another house that we ended up buying. But from that real estate transaction, we became very good friends. And it started initially with that real estate transaction, but then we put my house on the market. And it's one of our biggest jokes that we were in the middle of the 2010 housing market crash. Kind of everything had crashed. And my house at the time got, I think, 5 different bids on it. We never put flyers in front of the house, and I got about $10,000 more than I wanted for the house sale to begin with. And all my friends were like, my house has been on the market for like 90 days and got nothing, no nibbles or anything. And I'm like, I was told this was the best real estate agent. We connected. He advised us on what to do. We sold the house, and even at a higher rate than I wanted to. And so it was about finding that referral and having folks close to me say kind of all the same name in unison, that I'm like, I know I got the best real estate agent in town because he had that many referrals and that many connections that instantly recommended him when I said I needed a real estate agent. And so what's interesting, and I share the picture on the right, is we ended up doing the Cartathlon. There used to be a little marathon of food carts, and so that's a picture of us doing the Cartathlon a couple of years ago, where you run all around town to go to different food trucks. But what's important to understand is that you can expand your network and meet people that you never thought possible through your connections on social media. And so it's really important. I actually did a book club when I was an emergency manager for the author of one of the disaster books that I really liked. And what was funny was we did a book club and we live tweeted out the book conversation that we had about the book, and the author actually tweeted into our conversation. And so it was so awesome to be like having a real conversation with the author of the book that I had read, 5 or 6 times. And so you get to do things like that and meet people that you just never thought possible. And so it's important to kind of understand that those networks are out there and you can find those folks. I now work with disaster folks in New Zealand, in Australia, in China, and places far outside Vancouver, Washington, because I initially met them online first, and then we've gotten to meet and do work through a number of different organizations. Another thing I'll say is you can also have the opportunity to change the world. You have the ability to influence politics, religion, whatever you are interested in. And I got to be involved a couple of years ago in the county charter yes situation. And I usually stay very apolitical. I stay out of politics because as emergency manager, as soon as you choose a political side, you get fired as soon as the other person gets into office. And that's really common. So when people ask for my endorsement, I'm like, I don't ever endorse political candidates. I don't ever take a side. My voting record for the past 29 years is literally 51 to 49%, and I won't tell you which way it sways. But literally, I voted for Republicans, voted for Democrats. Well, a number of years back, when the charter kind of came into it, I ran for freeholder, my very first political position. I didn't get it. I ended up not realizing I was running against the former beloved mayor of Clackamas, Nan Hendrickson, and she's awesome. She won, which was great. But I got to be involved as a social media person in the Clark County charter situation. And what our goal was in running the social media for this charter campaign is that we wanted to promote civil discourse, engage all opinions, and not lock people out of the conversation. And I will tell you that was really hard to do because the politics was very divisive. We had a number of folks that would pop up. My favorite was in New York, 3 hours away, and he would get on our Facebook page at like 6 in the morning his time, 3 in the morning my time. And so I'd wake up with all of these negative comments we had to deal with. And I'm like, you don't even live here. Why are you involved in my politics? But what was interesting was our goal was not to delete people from the conversation at all. Because one of the big issues that we were dealing with in the charter was that people were different, not able to share their opinions. They were trying to share their content on different social media or Facebook pages, and their comments were being deleted and taken off. So it was important to understand that our goal was to keep everyone engaged in this conversation. At the end of the day, we only had to ban one person for not following the advisement that we gave them to stay civil and on task and not beat other people up. And so that was a huge win for us. And not only that, but the charter actually ended up winning that year, which was great. So it's important to understand you can use your influence for good. And then you can help other people in crisis. And kind of my last story is going to be about this a friend of ours who actually went to the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. I think this was, 2015. Bought tickets on Ticket City because it's still in my husband's tweet. And so it was his lifelong dream in order to go to the Super Bowl, right? And really wanted to go, really got the tickets, was super excited. They road tripped out to Phoenix, I believe it was. And got there and found out that the Ticket City had oversold the tickets for the Super Bowl. And so they all got into this hotel room and they were told, sorry, we don't have your tickets, have fun driving back home. And so he posted this really sad picture online of this is how close he was going to get to the Super Bowl. So my husband and I both reposted the information. Matt had very few social media contacts at that point, but he was a friend of ours. And so my husband and I both shared it online, and it created such a fervor that news media stories in Phoenix picked it up. He got to be interviewed and talk about their experience and the hundreds of dollars that they had spent for these tickets. And so a number of friends of ours reshared it, and they ended up, he and his buddy ended up getting tickets in a box next to who's the guy in the Super Bowl, the NFL chairman? Who's the
Roger Goodell?
What's that? Roger Goodell, yeah. He literally has a picture of him and Roger Goodell in the box, literally on the half line. And what was fascinating was at the point at which Ticket City finally settled and gave them, not only did Ticket City give them the tickets, but gave them several $1,000s for their problems, and told them they had never seen such a social media fervor created over, he's like, I don't know who your friends are, but you need to thank them because no one has created this much pressure on any organization. And so, my husband and I had nothing to gain from it. He was just a friend of ours, and we just wanted to help him get to the Super Bowl. So it was our win to see him on in the awesome box next to all sorts of celebrities, which was fun. And then, of course, I told you I work with digital volunteers. So not only changing the world for disaster, but I work with a number of different organizations that help out in disaster response. And there are social media folks all over that are monitoring, paying attention. We do a lot of question mark searches, looking for issues that folks are having during disaster. That doesn't always mean response comes. I'm really glad it came in your situation when you're on a ditch, but sometimes we are able to give that into the emergency situation and help get help to save other people's lives.
I find that a lot with missing people reports, like from the press event and the social groups. Like I just went before this class.
Yep.
There's a missing autistic child here in Vancouver, and just because Thomas said from Chris sent it, and then like everybody's forwarding it.
Oh yeah, it's awesome. Now I will say, there's my Cooking with Cheryl picture. My eggs on the bottom of that in my favorite shark pictures. But I will say there are downsides to social media. There is a lot of polarization. There's a lot of negativity. There's a lot of vitriol that wasn't around when I first started in 2008. And there are trolls. There are people that are out there that are really geared towards baiting people into emotional responses. And so I would say that if you are finding yourself feeling emotional, you see something and you're like, oh, I need to reply to that, let it rest for an hour. Write your response and walk away from your phone and don't pick it up for at least an hour or two, and then go back and see whether or not you really want to send that emotional response. Because what a troll essentially is they're trying to bait you into a response, and they don't really care what side you're on. They just care enough to make you look really angry or really out of control. And so it's important to understand that there are people that will bait you. There are people that will make fun of you. It's always that, don't read the comments, don't feed the troll, don't give the troll something to celebrate your demise because they got you to respond. And so there are risks involved in terms of if you're an emotional person and you are sharing on a dime, it is important to monitor, is this important? Is it really necessary? Is it kind? Is it something that will advance the conversation? So in summary, what can you do? Listen, learn, consume, amplify, produce content, and engage. And then what should you do? Be an awesome customer, develop a good reputation, expand your networks, and change the world and help others in crisis. So that's kind of what I have for you guys today. And happy to open up any questions that you have. I know I sort of almost took up all the time with my talk. So I think you got 4 minutes left. Yeah.
Okay, so clouds.
Clouds.
Almost sounds like you're endorsing clouds.
Oh my gosh, no. So here's my problem with cloud and algorithm type influences is that you can mess with the algorithms quite heavily. If you talk only in one particular topic, you will find yourself getting clout in that particular topic. And clout used to have some good perks. I used to get a whole bunch of free stuff from clout when I only talked about emergency management. But now clout doesn't know what to do with me because I talk about so many topics that they're like, you get 2% in everything instead of 90% in one thing. So I don't think anyone really uses a clout score anymore. Like we used to talk about it quite a bit, like, ooh, so-and-so has a 45 clout score. No, in fact, I will even tell you that follower count doesn't always matter. What matters is the engagement of your content, which means are people sharing it, are they liking it, are they commenting on it? And if you see content that you like, those are the 3 actions that you should always do, because that is what moves it up in the algorithm so that other people see it. And so if you are running social media for a business, one of the things that's really important is that your employees feel empowered to like, share, and comment on all of the content that your agency is putting out, because that is the way to boost it. It is not so much and in fact, we've tried this, my husband and I play with this all the time. If you go to Fiverr.com, you can buy 1,000 followers or 10,000 followers. He actually paid $5 and got 50,000 followers on a page that he was playing with. And what's funny is it's just bait farms. It's click farms, like in China or Russia or Canada, that simply click like on all these pages, right? But what happens is the followers never engage with your content. So you can have 50,000 likes on your page, and it still has the same algorithm score as mine that only has 3,000 or 4,000. So it's important to know it's not always about the followers, but it's about how engaged those followers are in talking with others. If you have 10 people that are engaged with your content and sharing and commenting on it regularly, you're going to be far more powerful than having 100 likes that do nothing. So it's really important. It's the quality of the engagement that the algorithms look for, and the quality of that person's engagement. So it's this kind of mesh network of, is this person powerful? Are they talking to someone else powerful? Are they, how does that connection work? Or are they just talking to themselves in a room? Other questions? Yeah.
How do you best manage a Twitter subscriptions? Because I started many years ago.
Yeah.
because I was working for a journalism site. So I have literally hundreds, maybe even 2,000, I think.
Yep.
2,000, and I'm not going to follow that stuff.
So I never follow my basic Twitter feed. What I do with my Twitter accounts is I put them into lists. So I categorize them based on what channel, what does this TV channel mean to me, right? Is it Discovery? Is it History? Is it Family and Friends? And the channels that I use for emergency management are they public safety, law and fire folks, sort of prime sources? Are they news media? Are they general citizens? Are they citizens outside the geographic area I'm looking for? So those are my 4 lists that I look at. And the reason I do that is because the tenor is different. When I'm looking at what the news media is sharing versus what the first responders are sharing, I can tell you right away if the first responders are dealing with something and the news media is out having lunch and not paying attention to the fact that something big is going on over here. And then I can also tell whether or not the public cares about it. Because I can see, does the public really care what the first responders are dealing with or what the media is saying about it? Because sometimes the media cares about something and really no one else does. And you can really get a sense for that if you categorize your people into lists.
But not subscribing, basically.
Yeah, not subscribing. Just use the lists and create them into the channels that you want to see in your Twitter following. You had asked earlier about how I manage Twitter or social media. I use TweetDeck, and I use TweetDeck on a desktop. And the reason I do is Hootsuite has a limit of only 3 accounts that you can manage, and I often am managing 10 to 15 different accounts. So I always have one column for all notifications, but then I set up additional columns, not only based on topic, but I also do it based on geolocation. So like in the Roseburg situation, we had a geolocation. You can put lat and long into TweetDeck, and I can do like a 5-mile radius around Roseburg. I can do the whole state of Oregon. I can do all of the United States to see whether or not it's, the gun control debate is being talked about nationally, but in Roseburg, do people care about it? So I often use geocoded searches in order to say what, and I will give a caveat. If you're using geocoded searches, you will realize that a lot of folks don't use hashtags. Only like 10% of people actually use hashtags as they talk. And a lot of times people in a geocoded area are really explicit. So there's a lot of racially charged language, gender charged language, a lot of bad language in general. So if I'm showing it to a mayor of a jurisdiction, I often don't have a geocoded search because I'm like, Twitter looks so foul if I look at it just around me as compared to my niches that I look for with my professional colleagues. So it is a huge haystack, and you got to narrow that haystack down to what you look at.
How often, if at all, do you recycle your content?
No, I don't recycle it at all, actually. I should. Now, I will say, so there are the opportunities to schedule tweets, right? So in TweetDeck, one of the cool things you can do is you can schedule content on a regular basis. And so from an organizational perspective, I do recycle content because there's certain key messages with my 911 organization that need to get out all the time. We're hiring, don't call 911 for anything but emergencies. And so there's that type of recycled content, but more from a business perspective. If you're following me and it's straight up just a personal follow, I never recycle content because I think that's kind of egoistic to do, unless I'm sharing someone else's stuff, but I don't even recycle then. So it's my authenticity is all about what's happening with me at any given point in time. So other questions?
I have
yeah.
I'm not a big social media person.
Sure.
I have a Twitter account that, I think I posted things a few times. And I'm more of a Facebook stalker, and I'll share things in Messenger with my husband.
Yeah.
But I have a very protected account.
Yeah.
Going out into the job market and having people, search us.
Yep.
Should I start using my account and being more?
Nope.
That doesn't matter.
Make your LinkedIn account look okay. Because I will say, if you're out in the job market and you're looking for a career side, so LinkedIn is kind of the Facebook for career type people.
Right.
And what I would say is, so my LinkedIn profile has my resume straight out, everything about me. And also you will find that you can learn a lot about me professionally there, but nothing personally, because I don't share anything personal on LinkedIn. And that's my rule between LinkedIn and Facebook. I share a lot more personally on Facebook, but I don't need HR recruiters looking at me on Facebook. They can look at me on LinkedIn, and if I'm sharing a link on my resume, I'm sharing the LinkedIn link that says, here's about me, unless you have a website page that you fashioned for yourself. Some people do that. So yeah, no, send them in ways they don't need to be on your Facebook page. No, and it's totally okay to be locked down. I am as well. So any last question? Maybe. Yeah.
Just want to know what your advice or opinion of Snapchat was in a business standpoint or professional.
So going back to I work for government. Everything has to be archivable and for public records requests. So from Snapchat perspective, now that being said, I teach law enforcement officers about Snapchat all the time because it's one of the biggest cyberbullying planet in the middle school and high school environment. So in fact, Snapchat just had, I think, its first dead body picture in the last 3 or 4 months. where someone actually posted a picture of a murder and put it on Snapchat. And so what's important to know is you're a law enforcement agency, you need to understand what Snapchat is, you need to understand how to advise school people on how to use it. But from I am involved in Snapchat as a parent because my daughter chose that as her social media platform. But from a business case, I can't make a business case for it because Snapchat has the individualized, like my daughter and I can share things more individualized, but in terms of people who follow me on Snapchat because I'm in 911, doesn't really happen. They follow me because of the images I'm posting, which are the selfies with the antlers, right? And so it's like, you have to be really creative if you have a business case for it. But if you're in public sector in business, you also have to be able to archive it and make it publicly reducible for any public records request. So I have an easy out there because I say I'm in government, can't use Snapchat.
Yeah. It's going to sound weird, but I was hearing that the biggest business that actually functions off of Snapchat is porn.
Yeah, that wouldn't
because
that.
porn stars can have their own individual Snapchats and charge you to access them. And it's just like, that's ingenious and really creepy at the same time. The two people using Snapchat are porn stars and middle schoolers.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, it's really important. And if you're a parent in this room, it's really important to teach your kids about their security rights online, their ability to block and delete users. I was talking about Marco Polo earlier, and my daughter was in a pic collage, is another one that's really popular among middle schoolers. And what pic collage does is it allows you to put pictures on a kind of graph board, kind of like a pin board, like on Pinterest, right? And what was interesting was my daughter got her first male follower that had like 13,000 other followers on pic collage. So I said, well, let's look at his content. And it was really interesting because his content was all grooming-based content for trying to reach out to girls in middle school age. So we immediately had the conversation of block, delete, move it out. And so it's really important to give your kids the ability to be able to navigate their users, to look at how their other folks are engaging that are following them. And that's the regular conversation my daughter and I have. You know, that person, well, I don't know this person. Well, what do they share online? And we look, you know, all the time at what people are sharing based on, is this going to be someone who's safe for you to connect with or not safe? And so she's very, very careful about locking that down herself. So you have to teach kids to be good digital citizens. Sorry, I'm coming over.
All right, let's
get out.
big round of applause.